one of the things that we always look for in founders is that, frugal nature, is the
Right.
making sure that every dollar makes sense and that you want to, leverage every dollar that you're spending to move the business forward. Whether that's, getting a better employee that's going to, have a 5x increase over somebody else, or whether that's, perfecting your marketing campaign to make sure that's as efficient as possible, or working to bring down your cost of goods sold to get your gross margin up. So, there's places where you can spend money, but it's actually furthering the business along. And then there's places where you can spend money where you haven't actually moved the needle at all.
Visitors kembali hadir bersama saya Yendi Yusra, dan kali ini kita akan berbincang-bincang dengan David Gowdey, Managing Partner dari Jungle Ventures. Hi David.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. Thank you for hosting me.
Thank you. Before we dive into the discussion, maybe you can introduce yourself and tell about what is Jungle Ventures.
Sure. So a little background on me is I've been investing in Southeast Asia for about over 20 years, about 21 years. I originally joined Yahoo back in 1999, based in Sydney, doing M&A and corporate development. And that was our regional headquarters. We covered India, Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and then eventually started covering North Asia, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, out of Sydney, and then moved to Singapore about 14 years ago. And at Yahoo, we built something called the Emerging Markets Group. So it was a fourth operating region at Yahoo, focused purely on the emerging markets. And so we based that team here in Singapore. We had about 300 people, engineers, product people, business development, sales, who were building products specifically for consumers in emerging markets. So, mobile-centric products, things that weren't happening at Yahoo in Sunnyvale. And through the course of that, spent a lot of time in Latin America and Africa, Middle East, Russia. We bought the largest portal in the Middle East. Yahoo didn't do anything that was right to left reading. We bought Koprol in Indonesia. I think it was the first kind of acquisition of an Indonesian internet company by a Western internet company. I think that was in 2010. And then the person who ran the Emerging Markets Group, he and I spun out and we joined TBG Capital in 2011. And that was a $2 billion fund. We were really hired to help build an internet practice within that fund. Worked on a lot of deals. The first international deal was Lenskart in India, when Piyush has gone on to raise some fantastic rounds now. The last deal I worked on was Property Guru, based here in Singapore, where we co-invested with MTech. So MTech had a strong partnership with Property Guru in Indonesia. And then in 2015, you could just see the whole region hitting an inflection point. I remember the internet penetration graphs, 10, 15 years ago, and we would add, 1 million or 2 million or 3 million internet users a year. And I think in 2016, the region was adding 7 million a month. And at TBG, we were writing, 40, 50 to 100 million equity checks, so very late stage capital. And so I just thought that, if you were going to ride this inflection point, you should come as early into the cycle as you could. So my two partners at Jungle, Amit and Anurag, had started the fund in 2012. They were the largest fund in Southeast Asia at that point. They had 3 exits in 3 years. Despite a pretty small fund size, they had some strong operating partners that they had brought into companies. And so a lot of that resonated with me. And so I left TBG in 2015 and joined for the first institutional fund that we raised at Jungle, which was in 2016. It was $100 million. And then we've gone on to raise another fund, which was $240 million. But, the focus has really pretty much stayed the same. About 50% of our investments are in software companies. Okay. And those break down into either regional software. So it's mainly software companies that are helping solving local or domestic regional pain points, Okay. And so if you think about in Indonesia or Vietnam, some of the pain points that SMEs face, those problems are not going to be solved from someone sitting in New York or San Francisco or London. You really need to be sitting in Jakarta to understand how to solve those problems in a local language. And then the other half of our software is really on global enterprise-focused software platforms. And then the other 50% of our investments is really on a broad theme around consumerism. And so it could take the form of direct-to-consumer brands, like we've invested in Sociola in Indonesia. It could be second derivative beneficiaries from e-commerce or consumption growth, like we've invested in Ware6 in Indonesia. But we've also invested in Credivo, consumer credit. All of those businesses will increase as consumption increases through digital channels.
Okay. Those names that you mentioned is very a big name in Indonesia right now, Credivo, Social, and Ware6. Yes. In terms of creating this the right startups, is it making any difference during this pandemic? Are you still focusing on the software and the related product or category, or are you starting to shift into more diverse kind of startups for Jungle Ventures?
I think it's our themes really haven't changed. I think some of the categories that we've focused in, some of the investments that we've made, continue. The aperture of those, I think, continues to widen a little bit. Okay. But I think the core focus remains consistent. I think the thing about COVID and the pandemic is obviously there were businesses that had major negative impacts. Yeah. So if you think about anything in the entertainment space or travel space, just because of the lack of travel, the lack of, venues being opened, certainly saw a lot of headwinds. But then other businesses have seen a lot of tailwinds. And so you've seen a lot more consumption shift to digital channels, people, purchasing food that maybe didn't order food through digital channels previously, or buying things and having them delivered to their house because they didn't want to go out or couldn't go out, or the retail shops weren't open. And so e-commerce became an avenue to get the things that you needed. And then I think a lot of those habits have continued on. So it wasn't we're going to do this and try it, and then as things reopen, we stop. But I think habits have actually transformed, and a lot of those patterns will continue to evolve. And then I also think that there's a third group of companies which have never, it's not been a negative impact or a positive impact, but they've kind of continued to grow, and hasn't seen a tailwind or a headwind as well.
Okay. In your opinion, what are the startup verticals that have a great opportunities to grow today?
In Southeast Asia, I think it's the region as a whole has just, a substantially higher addressable market size today. And so if you think about building a business, like I remember we looked at a company called SoundBuzz in 2005 based in Singapore, and they were kind of the Spotify of Southeast Asia back then.
Wow.
And I think they had 50,000 users around the whole region, and they were targeting to have, 200,000 users, which in 2005, it seemed like huge numbers. But if you think about the numbers today, the addressable market size here, it's so large, and it's really, it's only getting bigger and bigger. And I think that just creates lots and lots of opportunities. And so, a lot of times I say it's the most, if you could do anything in the world, it's the most exciting time to be building a business in Southeast Asia, because I think this is one of the unique regions where we have such a young population. It's, really merging online. There's a lot of friction in the offline world, in traditional businesses and things that people are trying to do that can be solved by tech and startups. And so I think that just creates a lot of opportunity. And so I think riding off the back of that, there's an enormous amount of consumption and consumer focused opportunities. But then on the other side too, this whole region is driven by SMEs.
Yeah.
So if you think about, any country in Southeast Asia, it's somewhere between 40 and 70% of GDP is driven by SMEs. Probably 2/3 or more of the workforce works at an SME. And all of these SMEs are increasingly starting to digitize their businesses. And that digitization process brings so many new opportunities, whether it's on the payments or transaction side, whether it's on sourcing, suppliers are becoming more efficient, whether it's managing your staff and employees better. It's a lot more software, a lot more marketplaces, a lot more opportunities in and around SMEs also create huge opportunities in the region.
One of the perks of Indonesian startups today, there's a lot of capital coming inside. There's a lot of venture capital chiming into the investment for Indonesian startups. What is your tips or what is your input for startup founders so they don't get overwhelmed and the right time for choosing the right venture capital?
Yeah, well, I think the interesting thing about the evolution of the region is that there are two venture ecosystems now. If you think back to even 5 years ago, really there was Singapore was the venture ecosystem. And so if you were a startup founder in Jakarta, you really got on a plane or you came to Singapore to meet a lot of the VCs that were based here. And I think flash forward to today, and there are some fantastic VCs based in Jakarta. And so I think we now have two venture capital ecosystems. There's Jakarta and there's Singapore, which I think has created a lot more opportunities for Indonesian-based startups, which I think is a fantastic thing. Also, if you think about the broader region, we also invest in India. There's probably two markets that are large enough to support very large outcomes, and I think those two markets are really India and Indonesia today. And it's really off the size and scale of the population, the GDP, the ability to build very substantial businesses. And so I think as we think about our investments, we tend to invest in more regional based companies because we want our founders to have the largest possible business they can. And there's a lot of homogeneity around the markets. And so, if you have something that works in Indonesia, there's probably a pretty good chance that will resonate in Thailand or resonate in Vietnam, and it can be extended to different markets. And so regional businesses will just have a much larger addressable market size. But Indonesia is one of those markets where you can build a very substantial business. Bukalapak, is a great example. Tokopedia, where it's, an Indonesia only play, but still a substantial business that you can build. So my generic advice to founders as they think about capital is really raise what you need in order to prove your next stage of growth. So, don't overcapitalize the business. Don't take on too much dilution. Be thoughtful about who it is that's investing and try and find people that are bringing more than just that capital to you. Because there's, most of the founders in Southeast Asia are still first-time founders. So they may have quite a bit of experience from a commercial or from a corporate perspective, but probably not a lot of experience in terms of building a startup. And there is a lot of experience in building startups in Southeast Asia. So if you can bring on partners that can bring capital and a lot of that experience on how to, shorten some of your learning curves, then I think you'll be able to scale your business at a much faster rate. And so that's probably my generic advice. I think there are opportunities for companies and founders, depending on who the founder is in the business, where you could overcapitalize the business. You could raise a very large round. I certainly, and I'm a believer in the fact that capital can be a competitive differentiator. You can scare away competitors. You can make people think twice about competing with you based upon the amount of capital that you have to deploy. And so it can become, a differentiator for you. But I think you need to balance that with the right valuation. And so the thing that I would hate to see with founders is that they give away too much of the business in order to bring that capital in. But if you can find someone who's giving you the right valuation, where you're not taking too much dilution, but you can raise a larger round than what you typically would, ordinarily, then I would take that capital and I would try and use that capital to grow as fast and as far as you can off of that base. But, one of the things that we always look for in founders is that, frugal nature, is the making sure that every dollar makes sense and that you want to, leverage every dollar that you're spending to move the business forward. Whether that's, getting a better employee that's going to, have a 5x increase over somebody else, or whether that's, perfecting your marketing campaign to make sure that's as efficient as possible, or working to bring down your cost of goods sold to get your gross margin up. So, there's places where you can spend money, but it's actually furthering the business along. And then there's places where you can spend money where you haven't actually moved the needle at all. And so you want that frugality, you want that focus on every dollar matters, irregardless how much money you're raising, because I think you'll maximize the capital that you're bringing in if you have that mentality.
I hear a lot of oversubscribes when in the investment or fundraising news. What is your take on that? Oversubscribed.
Well, it just means that there's more capital than there is room.
Okay.
And so I think
does it mean that the startup is more money that they are targeting to, or is it just a jargon that the VC are having?
Well, it's certainly it's venture capital jargon. So, I think anytime when you're raising capital, even as a public company, public companies can be oversubscribed on their book build. But anytime where the amount of capital that wants to come into the business is greater than the amount that the founder wants to take is an oversubscription of capital. That's always a positive thing from a founder's perspective, because that means that, they're able to choose where that money comes from. And so you could say to all of your potential investors, actually, I want you to invest 60% of what you really want, but I'm going to take a little bit less, but I'm going to take capital from all of you. Or you could just pick the ones that you really want to work with. And so because you have that option value, I think it's a very positive thing for founders.
So, why I asked that, because there's a pros and cons about the name, the title of oversubscribe in every fundraising news that we have. But in a way, it's a good for startups, right? Or it's just, like you said, VC just gave it to make it fancier.
Well, there's certainly a certain amount of media spin that you can put around.
Right.
And so, if you don't have visibility into, how much the founder originally wanted to raise versus what the round is versus what the interest level is, then, you can frame that however you want. Every round could be oversubscribed at closes, technically. Yeah. So you take all of that with a grain of salt.
Okay. So David, you've been doing this for quite a long time, right? CoPro is very famous in Indonesia, and we've seen your picture with CoPro founders when Yahoo acquired CoPro way back when.
Yes.
So by looking at the startup founders then and now, how do you see the development? Is it more mature or still need to be done in terms of founder startups state of mind?
Well, there is a lot more startups in the region now than there was even 5 years ago. And I think with quantity, there always comes a range of quality. I think, and if you offset that with the understanding that the cost to create a company is decreasing, and so your ability to found a company doesn't require a large amount of capital. It's obviously it's easier to create a startup than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, certainly. But that being said, I also think that the amount of founders that are out now that are of a very high caliber, high quality, that is absolutely increased. And, I think part of that has come with the evolution of the capital ecosystem. So if you think back to when we raised our second fund in 2016, there just wasn't a lot of capital around back then. And so if you were in a corporate job, if you were at Google or Facebook or, SEA or whatever, Grab or Gojek or whatever company you're at, if you thought that you had line of sight on a problem that, a startup could go and solve, there was, it was a lot of risk that you were taking on board to actually step out of your good job, particularly if you're married with kids, to go and do a startup. Could you raise money? Was the capital going to be there? Could you get the right people to also leave and join you? And so that had a very high risk bar, I think, for a lot of executives, where if you flash forward to today, I think there's a lot more capital that's available, and there's capital available at each stage. So whether it's very early seed stage, whether it's pre-A, Series A, B, C, D, all the way through, I think there's a tremendous amount of capital in the ecosystem. And so I think that's brought down the risk bar for a lot of people to step out and say, I am going to take this risk. I think I can build a really big business. I think I can, build a team around me of really high quality people. I can raise the capital to attract them, and we can go and we can attack this. And so I think because the risk profile has come down, I think a lot more people have decided to step out and have a go at creating a startup, which also lends me to why I think this is just such an exciting time in the region.
Okay. Last question, David. What next for Jungle Ventures? Is there any more fund in the near future, or are you guys still curating?
We'll continue to invest. As we run out of one fund, we'll raise another fund. We continue to invest in the same themes. Indonesia is a priority market for us. Vietnam, I think, is a very interesting market. We've increased our level of investments there. We also, one of the unique funds that's based in Southeast Asia that also invests in India. I think India is going through a very interesting transformation over the last few years. And so seeing a lot of really interesting companies there. I think the level of liquidity in the region has been increasing. You're seeing a lot more exits. And because you're seeing liquidity and distributions coming out of the venture capital funds, you're seeing a lot more limited partners or investors starting to be interested in investing and having exposure to the growth in this region, which I think it's that whole flywheel is starting to spin for the region, which I think is fantastic to see, and is only going to make everything stronger. And it's great to see a lot of these companies starting to go public, Bukalapak, and then with Grab and everyone else. I think that is also going to be driving a very strong M&A opportunity. If you think about the evolution of the Chinese market in terms of a lot of the major players wanting to expand horizontally, and they would do that through acquisitions. Most are also very inquisitive from a minority investment perspective. So I think you'll start to see that as these companies go public, they have strong balance sheets and strong public stock that they can use as currency. And so I think you'll see a lot more M&A activity as they expand and move into new geographies or adjacencies or new business lines. So I just think it's a great time to be in this part of the world.
Just to be clear, you are targeting not early stage start, right? But the later stage, or correct me if I'm wrong.
No, we are, our smallest check that we would invest is probably 500K to $1 million, all the way up to about 12 million as a first check. And so, the vernacular is the Series A, Series B, Series C. I think we're not as hung up on that. I think if we had to peg ourselves, we're a Series A, B fund. Most of our investments are in a pre-A to Series A, and then we'll also lead Series B rounds. But if it's a great company and we have a lot of conviction around the founder, then we could come earlier, we could go a little bit later. But that's really the sweet spot for us.
I'm telling you, as a reporter, there's a lot of upcoming early stage startups that
there's
more potential.
There's a lot of activity in the region.
Yes,
for sure.
Especially in Indonesia and outside Jabodetabek, there's a lot of upcoming new startups that have a great potential to be funded. But just like you said, that it's still early stage.
Yep. So absolutely, and we have a great team that we've hired. We continue to expand that team too, to make sure that we're plugging into the right people and finding those companies at the right stages.
Okay, thank you very much, David.
Founders that are out there, feel free to reach out.
Yes.
We'll always.
So the social media and the website or the LinkedIn, right?
Anything.
For them to reach out, Juggle Ventures.
Yep, or feel free to reach out to any of our founders. Any of them will be happy to give you an intro into us.
Okay. Thank you very much, David, for your time. And hopefully I get more funding news from Juggle Ventures
that sounds
very
great.
soon.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll see you next time. Okay. Bye, David.
Thank you very much.